in the US, we refer to this as mission creep, where sort of its mission expands out slowly and secretly. We don't know what's happening. And this is dangerous because powers that we would not have authorized our police agencies to use within our own countries against our own citizens are increasingly being used for exactly that purpose. They start out being used outside the borders in situations of extreme threat where we're worried about, somebody bombing the marketplace. And then suddenly we see it being used at home to search for drugs, to search for the associations of people, their political identities. And what's really dangerous is because of the way technology has become cheaper, it has an expanded reach, these things are no longer happening on a targeted basis. For example, we may want to listen to a terrorist's cell phone in Pakistan. We know who this terrorist is. We want to listen to his phone calls to see who he's talking to. That's called targeted surveillance. What we've seen in the last year is the birth of what's called, well, not really the birth, but the explosion of what's called mass surveillance, which is where we monitor the telephone communications of everyone in Pakistan, of everyone in, the Congo, everyone in China, everyone in Russia, and even everyone in Sweden, everyone in Germany, everyone in France, and then eventually everyone in the United States. And this isn't science fiction, this isn't a prophecy, this is happening today. Within the United States, the president himself has appointed review panels to look over his programs that have been authorized to intercept the call records of every citizen in the country. Now, where they have the technical reach to do this differs in place to place, but the reality is the policy is there. And this mission creep is extraordinarily dangerous because we now see it being automated to things such as drones, to airplanes. Just yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, there was I'm not sure if everyone's seen it, there was a newspaper article headlined that American cell phones are being targeted in secret US spy programs. What this means is that we have airplanes in the United States operating domestically that have sensors attached to them that listen to the emanations of our cell phones, the wireless adapter cards in our laptops, our Bluetooth headsets, the hardware addresses in your iPod or your iPhone. All of these things have what's called a universally unique identifier, a UUID. And that means once they find out where you've been 3 times in the day, for example, your home, where you work, and where you study, where you go to worship, where you go to vote, anything that can be traced back to you, your friends, your associations, they can then recognize, based on a very small amount of information, such as 3 places you've been, that this hardware address is your iPhone. And then when these planes are circling around our cities, and again, this was reported yesterday, this isn't prophecy, they can track all of your locations because you sit here in your office. As the plane orbits you, it hears your cell phone at multiple locations on that orbit. And based on that, it can triangulate your location. It can track your movements on an increasing and basically permanent scale based on the cost of storage, based on how widely they want to use this. And this is really dangerous because we go, how did this happen? It wasn't authorized by law in the United States. There was no public debate about this. It happened in secrecy. In fact, when the journalists who reported this story went to the government, and they said, what is this? Why is this happening? Can you explain why it needs to happen? Can you justify this intrusion into our rights? Because it's extreme and it's unjustified. And the government said, we can't say that this program exists or that it does not exist. We can't defend it, and we can't say that it's necessary, because to do so would acknowledge that the program exists. And this is critical because we've got branches of government where we rely on the checks and balances, the friction between the court system, between the executive agencies, the police, the investigators, and between our legislature. And what happens is we have basically organizations and politicians shutting us out of the court system. They're taking the public out of the decision-making process in the elections by saying that we don't need to know about these programs, they're secret, telling us about them will damage national security. And then once they're implemented, If our rights are violated by the programs, typically we would go to the courts, we would make our case, the government would make their case, and then we would actually have the judges decide, is this right, is this proper, does it respect rights? By denying the programs even exist, but refusing to say that they don't exist at the same time, they can tell the courts that they don't have the jurisdiction to rule on these programs. They can't consider the question of whether our rights were violated at all. And this is a critical fact of the revelations of last year that many people didn't understand. They thought about it as only being about surveillance. And surveillance is a massive issue, particularly when we talk about the fact that it's happening on an untargeted basis. It's happening en masse. We're no longer watching criminal suspects, we're watching entire populations. But the reality is that surveillance was only the mechanism of understanding for this new and novel change in the model of government in Western and liberal societies where we never would have expected this activity to occur previously. And this is where we are losing the ability to actually shape and guide the policies of our governments, the ideas that we have, where we say the line should be drawn around the boundaries of our rights. And necessarily as a result of this, we become less self-directing, less liberal, and less free. And I think that's something that we need to resist at every turn. And particularly, there's one thing that was not well understood about the story that came out yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about these planes subtly monitoring all of our communications, where we're going, is the fact that, as I said before, this is a program operating domestically within the borders of the United States. But it turned out it was actually reported in February of this year. The Department of Justice has no reason to say this program doesn't exist because it was already revealed with our own documents, with the National Security Agency's own documents, where this program was a foreign intelligence program intended to track terrorists. That's why it was authorized to exist. And they literally called it shenanigans, a word for trickery, a word for deception, a word for a kind of nefarious activities. This program was used to fly around huts in the desert in Yemen. And we said this was for a necessary purpose, to keep our nation safe. And inevitably, only a few short years later, without any authorizing law, without any awareness of the public, without any public debate or any political discussions, we see that that same program that was authorized to hunt terrorists is now hunting small-time criminals at home in our own cities. But it's affecting all of us. All of our communications are now being intercepted. All of our locations are now being monitored simply as a product of using these programs in new and novel ways. And we have to guard against that.
Thank you for that. I want to